3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. This is weird, right? How many times have we talked about the pixelated screen? You stand there and you don't realise that you're so close to it, you can't actually make out the proper images on it. You're just looking at the pixels. We're about today to hear, and it's going to happen at about 11:30, I'm told. So, unfortunately, that means there will be no mystery hour today. If you'd like to air your grievances, please take it up with the government. Take it up with the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself, or indeed the Prime Minister. And we'll take it in its entirety. It's going to be just shy of an hour, but it seems fairly clear that it's going to include approximately £24 billion of what could be loosely described as tax rises and about 30 billion quid of spending cuts. This is in a country which, of course, is still reeling from the impact of so-called austerity, political ideology built upon the idea that you need to keep rich and you need to help rich people get even richer while closing libraries and similar in places like Wolverhampton, as a sort of a bad interpretation of an Alexis Sale joke. So, incredible, really, when you think about it. It's 3 months since they announced plans to cut taxes by about 50 billion quid. And it's the same party. I don't quite know why this has hit me with such momentum this morning. I mean, I knew it all along. It was a tweet, actually, by the Labour MP and sort of tireless speaker of Truth to Power, Chris Bryant, who simply pointed out that in the 3 months, Tory MPs will have gone from cheering an essential £50 billion tax cuts package to cheering an equally essential £60 billion package of tax rises and spending cuts. He adds, no wonder voters don't trust them. They couldn't navigate a Tesco trolley down the vegetable aisle. It's incredible, right? I'm a bit embarrassed that I looked at that and found myself thinking, God, he's right. Is it because we do it every day, do you think? Is it just because we do it every day? Or is it because giving huge platforms to right-wing people who don't understand anything still sets the tone for much of the national conversation? You would have thought, wouldn't you, that by now Brexit would have taught us all that giving enormous platforms to right-wing people who don't understand anything but have the most strong opinions and the most powerful positions, and they're absolutely adamant that yada yada yoom. You'd have thought Brexit might have taught us all they're probably best ignored, but they've got these strong opinions, you know, with their Daily Telegraph columns and their TV shows. Oh, yes, we need £50 billion worth of tax cuts. Go, Liz Truss. I think I'll dig out some examples for you of U-turns, of reverse ferrets undertaken upon a scale that is, I mean, almost unbelievable. It's happening now with the American midterm results as well, of course. It's often the same people writing about how it's going to be an absolute whitewash for the Democrats. It's going to be this huge red wave taking over the Senate and getting a massive majority in the Congress. And then, you know, reality kicks in and they're right in the polar opposite. The people who wrote about Liz Truss's policy being epic, it's just what the country needs. Finally, the front page of the Daily Mail, do you remember? Finally, a true Tory budget. Daily Telegraph say this is the best Conservative budget of my lifetime. That bloke, Alistair Heath, he's still got a column. How does that work? I don't know what you do for a living. I may be talking a little later about a courier company that's managed to lose an armchair of mine. If you work for a courier company and you lost an actual armchair, presumably there'd be some chance that your job might be in jeopardy. Or somebody's job might be in jeopardy. You write a column about the worst budget in recorded history, saying it's the best budget I've ever seen. You'd think that there might be somebody in the chain of command going, yeah, we certainly need to have a bit of a chat. What do they call it in HR? We need to have an appraisal. It's time for your annual appraisal. This thing you wrote. So, editor of the Daily Mail, finally a true Tory budget. 3 months later, a Tory government is going in almost the same speed in precisely the opposite direction. I'm working up to a question about how. Actually, that's how. Just how. I feel like Fred Dinage. How? I can't just keep saying how, can I, in different tones of voice until 15:15. On the plus side, we'd hit the break on time. It's the first time for everything. On the downside, I don't know how entertaining it would be, or indeed how though? But how though? That's it, isn't it? There it is. It's the same government. I was hoping to make a comparison of the cabinet, but I haven't got the names that I need in front of me. The full cabinet of Liz Truss and then the full cabinet of Rishi Sunak is something that is worth having a look at, because off the top of my head, Suella Braverman, right? Suella Braverman is Home Secretary. Is she Home Secretary or Foreign Secretary? I get so confused. Home Secretary in both governments. Let's look at it through the lens of Suella Braverman then, shall we? How does that work? We have this thing called collective cabinet responsibility. It's not as clear and comprehensible as it was when I did, believe it or not, when I did my politics A-level in 1990. Quite a big part of studying politics A-level in 1990, goodness knows what it's like now, but quite a big part of studying my politics A-level in 1990 there were two principles. Individual ministerial responsibility, which meant if something went wrong in your department, the Secretary of State took responsibility for it and occasionally resigned. I think a great example of that would have been Peter Carrington resigning after Argentina invaded the Falklands. He resigned as Secretary of State for Defence, I think. And the other one is collective cabinet responsibility, which is the idea that by dint of agreeing to be in cabinet, by remaining in cabinet, by being in cabinet, you take responsibility for every decision taken by cabinet or by the Prime Minister. You are, to coin a phrase, you're all in it together. And what would be a good example of that? It's a bit complicated, but when Michael Heseltine resigned as Trade and Industry Secretary over the Westland thing, that I think that could be used, that could be cited as an example of collective cabinet responsibility, meaning he couldn't go along with the decision that had been made. Think about George Eustice this week revealing how awful he thought Liz Truss's trade deal with Australia was, but he stayed in the cabinet and did nothing about it. These are two fine principles, large part of our unwritten constitution, that don't really exist anymore. And here we are with Suella Braverman in both cabinets. A cabinet that was there was Foreign Secretary Peter Carrington. Forgive me. Thank you, Quentin. I love my live fact-checking on the programme. I've probably got Heseltine's job wrong as well. It's a miracle I got an A in that A-level, isn't it? Although possibly I knew a little bit more at the time than I do now. So you've got Suella Braverman, Home Secretary in Liz Truss's cabinet, that announced the necessity of £50 billion worth of tax cuts, and Home Secretary in Rishi Sunak's cabinet, which is about to announce the necessity of almost £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. That is somehow the issue that I want to talk about today. I haven't yet worked out, it's only 11 minutes after 10, I've got at least 3.5 minutes, so nobody panic. I haven't yet worked out precisely how to talk about it. I can't really ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how mad is this? That's the question I want to ask you most mornings now about most topics. On a scale of 1 to 10, how mad is this? We've got the same government. It's the same. There hasn't been a general election. It's the same government. It's a government elected on Boris Johnson's 2019 manifesto. We haven't even mentioned the differences between what Liz Truss announced 3 months ago and Boris Johnson campaigned on in 2019. Oh, my days, I'd forgotten about that. This is absolutely crackerjack. So they get into power on the back of a manifesto that is then abandoned by the new Prime Minister, who has got into Downing Street without any public vote. She then gets defeated by a lettuce and leaves Downing Street, and the new fella comes in with the polar opposite policy platform from the one that got the last person into Downing Street in the first place. I think I've got a question. What do they stand for? What does the Conservative government actually stand for? Because you say to me, oh, they stand for tax cuts, James. They stand for tax rises and spending cuts. I said, well, what did they stand for 3 months ago? And you said, well, the exact opposite. How can they be allowed to do this? I mean, there's not much prospect of a general election, and there's always a slight danger, isn't there, with the footballification of politics, that those of us who are pretty clear-eyed about the catastrophes visited upon our country utterly unnecessarily by the people still in power, those of us who are pretty clear-eyed about it are possibly prone to seeing an even bigger problem than there really is here. But I'd love to hear a loyalist explain this to me. Because here's the thing, right? If you imagine you've got Tory till I die in your Twitter profile. I mean, just as a quick aside, that's quite sad. But let's just imagine you have Tory till I die. This is the essence of footballification, isn't it? The absolute distillation of it. You're cheering the exact opposite of what you were cheering 3 months ago. And that's it. That's objectively incredible. I don't think this has a precedent in politics. Possibly internationally it does. But in terms of domestic politics, this is like a reverse ferret made flesh. 3 months ago, £50 billion worth of cuts. Yes, Tory till I die. I know I am. I'm sure I am. I'm Tory till I die. 3 months later, £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. Oh, yes, I know I am. I'm sure I am. I'm Tory till I die. So what were you cheering 3 months ago? Tax cuts, everybody, tax cuts. What are you cheering today? Tax rises, really love those tax rises. I can't make sense of this. How? I should have just said how for 4 minutes. I told you I should have just... How? We did the coma yesterday, didn't we? We used the coma question yesterday. Well, how would you explain this to somebody who has been asleep? In this case, for 3 months, not even for our usual 10 years or something like that. For 3 months. What do they stand? What is government? What is politics? What is conservatism? What is the point of this government? I mean, what is going on? 3 months ago, £50 billion worth of tax. I almost want the sort of gammon and pineapple party to ring in today and explain to me why I'm wrong and it's actually perfectly normal to cheer 3 months ago the policy that is the polar opposite of the policies that you're going to be cheering today. I'd love to hear how you do it, but we both know that you can't. Which is why, doff cap, tug forelocks, not for the likes of me to ask difficult questions. I know I am, I'm sure I am, I'm Tory till I die. Can I open up the phone lines? I haven't really asked you a question. I sometimes put my faith in you that you'll respond in a constructive and illuminating way, even in the absence of a question. It's because I'm a bit of a maverick. I might put a sign up in the studio saying you don't have to be mad to work here, but it helps. 0345 6060 973. I am going to ask you. I said I am going to ask you then. It's an early intervention from the Gammon and Pineapple Party. I am going to ask you, what is going on? What's going on? It's not the coma question, it's the Marvin Gaye question. What's going on? What's going on? Okay? 0345 6060 973. Here's Rob. He says, Rob, ring him, mate. Please don't be politically and economically naive just for the sake of a left-wing rant. It's called changing circumstances. Okay, mate, what circumstances have changed in the last 3 months? Tumbleweed. Oh, I suppose you could argue that the consequence of the policies you were cheering 3 months ago are so utterly appalling that they have created the environment in which we need the policies which are going to be announced later today. In which case, how can you possibly be cheering both? Because you cheered the last lot. You should probably give up cheering for at least a decade if you cheered the last lot of policies announced by Liz Truss. In fact, there's quite a strong case for arguing that you should be banned from cheering for life, whether you've got a newspaper column, a radio show or a TV channel. If you cheered the last lot of policies, the 50 billion quid's worth of tax cuts, you should be banned from cheering for the rest of your natural life because you're an idiot. You're an absolute clown. You're a weapon of unprecedented proportions, whether you've got a column in the Daily Telegraph saying it's the best Tory budget of my life, or whether you're writing a front page for the Daily Mail saying, finally, a true Tory budget. 3 months later, you're priming your guns now to start cheering for the exact blooming opposite. What is going on? 0345 6060 973. You put the tax cut in, you take the tax cut out, in, out, you shake it all about, you do the Rishi Sunak and you turn around, and that's what it's. I promise I won't do any more singing after this. 21 minutes after 10. I'm sorry. I have actually got a question. How can anybody, whether they are a cabinet minister, a commentator, a newspaper columnist, or you, how can anybody possibly support the Tories when they announce £50 billion worth of tax cuts and support the Tories when they announce £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. Crucially, within a 3-month window, because, of course, our funny little friend talking about changing circumstances would have a point if we were talking about a 3-year or a 3-decade change in circumstances. But in the space of 3 months, with no meaningful change to what is happening in the world, the pandemic is over, the war in Ukraine is now factored into forecasts, the OBR advice, if it wasn't for the fact that they did that stupid budget 3 months ago, the OBR advice then would be the same as the OBR advice now, or forecasts now. So, and answer it either from the perspective of being someone who, because you must feel quite silly now that you've had it laid out in front of you like this. You cheered it 3 months ago and you're cheering the polar opposite today. Talk me through how you do that while the rest of us speculate on what it's like for other people. How can anybody, whether a cabinet minister, and you're looking at the various... So James Cleverly stayed as well, didn't he? Wasn't he Foreign Secretary in both cabinets? Liz Truss's new cabinet. James Cleverly he got promoted from education to foreign by Liz Truss and stayed there for Rishi Sunak. So let's pick those two of the 4 great offices of state. Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary. Collective cabinet responsibility. They were 4 square behind £50 billion worth of tax cuts 3 months ago, and they're 4 square behind £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts today. How? How does that work? It is. I mean, how? Ray's in Vauxhall. Ray, how?
Hi, James. Well, I actually started formulating my answer during your initial monologue because the question I thought was coming, which was...
And now you've forgotten. Now you've forgotten what it was because the monologue took so blooming long.
I'll try to stick with the flow. How does the Tory party have effectively Liz Truss's set of policies and then now, suddenly 3 months later, Rishi Sunak's?
Yes.
And I think the answer is quite simple from my point of view, is the Tory party is split almost right down the middle. It's so polarised. I mean, we talk about politics being polarised, but even within the Tory party... it's a massively polarised, group, and you've got the Liz Truss supporters that voted for Liz Truss, policy.
Just so you know, I'm going to let you finish, but this isn't going to work. I can already see huge holes in your theory, which I'll share with you shortly. One of them is shaped like James Cleverly, and the other one is shaped like Suella Braverman. But carry on.
Right. Well, okay. So I'm talking about the fact that her policies were supported and voted for by the Conservative Party members because they were, promised the unicorn theory that rainbows and unicorns were around the corner if you vote for me, and then obviously none of that was actionable or even implementable. And then that cold harsh reality almost had Rishi Sunak forced upon them. I'm sure they would not have accepted that, but that's what happened in order to reverse everything that she'd promised. So she went through a campaign of false promises without being implemented, almost as if she was in opposition, if you like, without being tested.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, and then she comes in, and obviously then she's removed forcibly, and then everybody that's voted for her, I don't think they suddenly switched their allegiance to Rishi Sunak at all. They just got egg on their face.
No, you can't. I mean, self-interest is an answer, but do you know? I think I've done a boo-boo, Ray. Mm-hmm. I read out Chris Bryant's tweet talking about 3 months, and she became Prime Minister on the 6th of September 2022. It's now the 17th of November, but the fiscal announcement was on the 23rd of September, so it's about 8 weeks. It's not even 3 months.
Yeah, 2 months.
It's about 8 weeks. So within the space of 8 weeks, they've gone from cheering £50 billion worth of tax cuts to cheering £60 billion worth of the opposite. So here's the problem you've got. My question, you're right, I guess halfway through my monologue, this is one of the problems with interminable monologues. You could be forgiven for thinking that's where it was going. It probably was, but then it changed direction. Not as violently as the Conservative government does, but fairly violently. And it leaves this. How can James Cleverly and Suella Braverman be Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary in the same governments that now propose polar opposite policies? How?
Well, I mean, that's something I haven't really thought about answering. I mean, I would imagine from, off the cuff responses that, they're just clinging on to
shameless self-interest, utterly shameless, weapons grade self-interest.
Yeah, absolutely, and they see an opportunity, they jump on it.
James, Clevers, it's Truss here. Could you go around the studios today explaining why £50 billion worth of tax cuts are absolutely necessary and by far the best thing that this country could possibly do to itself at this time? Of course I can, boss. Book me a car now. I'm on the phone to Addison Lee. I'll be there in the morning. Fast forward 8 weeks. 8 weeks, James. Rishi here. Could you possibly tour the studios tomorrow explaining why £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts are absolutely the best thing that could possibly happen to this country at this time? Absolutely, I can, boss. I'm on it now. The Addison Lee is pulling up outside. It is beyond belief, right? Beyond belief.
But that's his role, I think, isn't it? It's not. I mean, whatever position he's given, it's sort of superfluous to the fact that he's willing to do that. That mouthpiece, news run. There are certain politicians who are selected for that role, aren't they?
Known in the trade as greylinging,
exactly,
Chris Greylinging. But there's the thing. So he gets the call from Rishi Sunak, or Suella Braverman gets the call, and I've got the list in front of me. Who else is on both lists? I can't do this live. I was like spinning plates. I'd like you to stay on as Foreign Secretary, James. And James cleverly, surely says, well, I can't, can I? Because I was fully on side with Kwasi's budget 8 weeks ago. The one where he refused to let the Office of Budget Responsibility even have a look at it. And so I can't possibly... I don't think I'm wrong on this. I'm conscious sometimes of being a victim of footballification, a victim of my own theory, but I don't think I am on this one. So you ring you up and say, Suella, I'd like you to stay on as Foreign Secretary. Or in fact, not even stay on. I'd like you to come back as Foreign Secretary, despite the fact you were sacked 6 days ago for egregious breaches of national security. She'd have to say, I can't, Rishi. Thanks, mate. But I can't because I was all four square behind Kwasi's budget. Alison's in Falkirk. Alison, what's going on?
James, they're not governing, they're advertising. I think your last caller, the word that struck me was campaign.
Yes.
This is an advertising campaign. It's nothing to do with what they do. And advertising campaigners, advertising people will go out and say whatever their commissioner wants them to say, regardless of whether they agree with it or not. So the campaign, what they've done is they're going for the best and oldest campaign in the world, which is it's new and it's improved. And that's all they have to say.
Something terrible just happened.
What?
I think I just got a hopium rush.
Oh, you didn't?
I did. I just got a hopium rush.
I'm not the person to give you a hopium rush.
No, not from you. It was a sort of side effect of what you were saying, because I was about to say, no, I do actually think that Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are tackling the problems head on. I mean, they're clearly not going to announce anything later today which is designed either to please the vampires and ghouls of Tufton Street or indeed to cynically curry votes, are they? Because it's going to be bad news for absolutely everybody. So I don't think... No, this isn't hopium, actually. I tell a lie. It's a false dawn. I'm not coming up on it. The claim that they were doing advertising doesn't work on this bit, because this bit is the tough bit. They're doing what should have been done 3 months ago, I think.
I don't think they're doing the right thing.
What is the right thing then?
I think the right thing would be to call a general election.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that, but that ain't going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen in an autumn statement. So I think your analysis, in fact, I wonder whether this, in fact, is the whole point of this conversation. Everybody's answer to the question is going to fit half of the problem. So Alison's answer beautifully describes Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, just the most ludicrous, Tufton Street-inspired gibberish that British politics hopefully will ever witness. But, of course, it was cynically designed to please whoever it is that funds these so-called think tanks like the Institute of Economic Affairs, and to cynically hoover up votes from people too, dare I say, too daft to understand what was going on, a tactic that worked brilliantly with Brexit. But it's not going to apply to today, because today's going to be bad news for everybody. Everybody's taking a bath today, including, hopefully, the high earners who Liz Truss essentially threw several bones to. 8 weeks ago, and it's the same party. It would be like walking into a shop. I've got an analogy coming on. I'll do it after the very latest news headlines with Lottie Morley. This is the worst party game ever. In fact, speaking of games, there's no mystery out today, so what a wonderful opportunity it would be to buy yourself the board game. I'll give you a little bit more detail on that. I mean, you could even turn the radio off if you don't want to listen to the autumn statement and play the board game. But I wouldn't do that. I'd have the radio on in the background so you could listen to Jeremy Hunt's dulcet tones. I'm told he's going to begin his autumn statement by announcing, I'm very sorry that we crashed the economy. And the we here is crucial because the worst game ever is me currently with 4 loosely photocopied pieces of paper in front of me trying to work out exactly who's in both cabinets, Rishi Sunak's cabinet and Liz Truss's cabinet. I can tell you Suella Braverman, James Cleverly, Ben Wallace and Therese Coffey, Kemi Badenoch. There's going to be others. Why don't you do some work for once? Just text me, 84850. You text me who else. Because all of these people in the space of 8 weeks have gone from cheering £50 billion worth of tax cuts to cheering £60 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. And that is absolutely incredible. And yet, British politics is so bent now. It's so broken. It's so completely corrupted, largely by Brexit, but the bits that weren't broken by Brexit have been broken by Boris Johnson, and the bits that weren't broken by Boris Johnson and Brexit have been completely blown up by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Everybody has to hope. It's not hopium that says this. It's just, honestly, everybody has to hope that Hunt and Sunak get something right today. It would be treasonous not to. But in the space of 8 weeks, these people who are cabinet ministers, so forget about the columnists and the commentators for a moment, cabinet ministers, Suella Braverman, James Cleverly, Ben Wallace, Kemi Badenoch, Therese Coffey, have gone from, imagine a shop, right, called Keith's. You walk into Keith's and it is selling handbags. It's a handbag shop. And you say to your mum, you say, do you like Keith's? And she'll say, yeah, I love it. I'll always like going down to Keith's. They've got some lovely handbags. And then, for no reason whatsoever, Keith suddenly stops selling handbags and starts selling joints of gammon, let's say. Or, no, yeah, that works. Gammon joints. But it's still called Keith's. The out of the shop still looks exactly the same, right? No, that doesn't work, does it? Because gammon isn't the opposite of handbag. This analogy needs a little bit of work. So what can you sell products that are the opposite of each other? Like fridges and heaters? Would that work? Do you see what I mean? You go into a shop and it's selling something and you say, oh, I love this shop. And then you go into another shop. No, and then you go into I told you this analogy needed work, didn't I? Thank you. You're doing my job for me on the cabinet front, and I'll run through some of those names once I've double checked them. Is Nadeem Zahawi in both cabinets? Did he get? Don't know. Yes, he is. He is. There we go. Nadeem Zahawi is in both cabinets. This is great. We should do this more often. It makes my life an awful lot easier. Penny Mordaunt, was she in both cabinets? Was Penny Mordaunt in both cabinets? Have I got her there? And I haven't. She is in this one. Where has she gone? I can't see her on that, so I can't put her on the list yet because I can't find her on the second list. This is great. Oh, there she is. Got her. Yeah, she's that. This is great radio, right? Just checking. Okay, hang on. Let me find another one. Chris Philp. Okay, let me just have a look on the Liz Truss list. Ben Wallace, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Kit Martin, Spender, Liz Grace. No, I haven't got Chris Philp on this one. I don't know if he was cabinet level in Liz Truss's cabinet, in Liz Truss's government. Anyway, Suella Braverman, James Cleverly, Ben Wallace, Therese Coffey, Kemi Badenoch, Nadeem Zahawi and Penny Mordaunt so far are all completely on side 8 weeks ago with £60 billion worth of spending cuts and completely on side today with the polar opposite. Just explain to me how that can happen and what on earth a Conservative government or the Conservative Party stands for if it can simultaneously, or at least 8 weeks apart, cheer X and then cheer the opposite of X. Craig's in Cannock. That's a nice alliterative ring to it. Craig, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'll firstly say I'm not a Conservative, although the first part of what I'm going to say is probably going to imply I was if I didn't say that in advance. In the scientific world, you've got scientists will change their minds on theories on any new evidence that becomes available. So,
and in other worlds as well. John Maynard Keynes supposed to have said, when the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do?
Yeah, and I'm guessing their argument's going to be, well, once we saw how the markets reacted to the mini-budget, we realised that this was the wrong way to go. So
Yes, but that might be their
this is the
argument.
better
I
option.
think you're right. That would be their argument, but it's specious because everybody knew how it was going to go. Everybody vaguely sensible knew what was going to happen, and the Office of Budgetary Responsibility exists to tell them what is going to happen, and Kwasi Kwarteng refused to look at it. So you can't cheer an absolute refusal to look at or listen to forecasts and then cheer a response to what the forecast would have forecast if only you'd consulted them in the first place.
Completely with you on that. That's what I was saying. That's what I think they're going to say. They're going to try and suggest that that's the case because it gives them, I was going to say, a shred of credibility.
But it doesn't, does it?
A pretense of a shred of credibility.
Yeah, nicely put. A pretense of a shred of credibility because it's their job to know what's going to happen. You don't just sit, otherwise we don't need politicians. We'll just pluck a policy out of the hat, chuck it in the air and see what the markets do. They were telling us what was going to happen. They were telling us that this was going to create growth. They were telling us that this was the best possible thing for the British economy. Their fellow travellers in the right-wing media were telling us that this is the finest Conservative budget of their lifetimes. They were telling us, at last, a true Tory budget. So they don't get that argument, do they? Because their job, whether it's in commentary or in politics, is to explain to us why a policy is a good idea and what it's going to do. So when it does the polar opposite, they should all have resigned. All of them.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I mean, the thing with it is that she made the change. It's pretty obvious to me.
Go on.
It's down to the likes of keeping some level of power, some level of the extra money coming in and that side of things. And I don't think it just started with Brexit, if I'm honest.
No.
I think it started with the Liberal Conservative coalition.
Do you?
Nick Clegg changed his mind on the tuition fees and that side of things to allow the Liberals to get their foot in the door and get a little bit of power.
I mean, I see that as horse trading rather than complete abandonment of I mean, you're going to argue with me, aren't you, on this?
It was a core Liberal principle that they were going to abolish tuition fees.
Yeah, and then they went along with it. I suppose in the context of coalition, you have to surrender some of your key pledges in order to affect some of the others. What would he offer up as maybe the referendum on electoral reform or something like that? But yeah, I think you're probably right. Certainly from the public's point of view, that very dangerous fear that they're all as bad as each other takes some support from the point that you make. Thank you, Craig. We've got an analogy. No, it's an unsigned text. I don't know why you haven't signed it. It's an absolute masterpiece. The shop analogy, James, should be a vegan food store becoming a butcher's. That's exactly what it is. So Keith's is a butcher's shop, right? And we all love going to Keith's. We get black pudding, we get sausages, we get some lovely juicy gammon, and we all love going to Keith's, right? And we write on TripAdvisor, Keith's is great, and we write on all of the little Facebook groups, we love Keith's, we love Keith's. And then without telling anyone, Keith's completely changes what it sells to entirely vegan products and vegan meat products, fake meat products, okay? I can't believe it's not bacon. That kind of stuff. And they don't change anything else. They've got the same signage outside, they've got the same staff inside, and everyone pretends that nothing's changed at all. So you walk into the shop and you say, could I have some bacon, please? And they give you vegan bacon. They don't say, sorry, this is vegan. And the claim now is that the customers have exactly the same relationship with the Keith selling meat that they have with Keith selling vegan product. That's it, isn't it? So the customers, conservative voters, supporters, call them what you will, have actually gone from claiming that their juicy meat shop is the best shop in the world to claiming that they hate meat and their juicy vegan shop is the answer to all of their prayers. That is right-wing British politics. Columnists have gone from saying, I love juicy sausages, these are the best sausages I've ever tasted, to saying meat is murder, without even admitting that they've made a mistake or changed their mind or undertaken any form of U-turn. That's what we've done. We've utterly broken any vague semblance of objective truth, of reality, of integrity, of professionalism, of accountability. And some people are still loving it. It's 10:45. 10:49 is the time. Should have summoned the usherwood, shouldn't I? Because we are now close to, I think, a definitive list of cabinet ministers who have been in both cabinets, both before and after U-turns, which I find staggering. I really do, because of the scale and the speed of the U-turn. Yeah, if you announce something and then a war starts, and you say, well, we're not going to do that anymore because there's a war on, I think that's absolutely fine. I think, even under the rules of footballification, you're going to struggle to say, no, I absolutely demand that you continue to commit to huge cuts in defence spending while we're being invaded by a foreign power. Do you see what I mean? As an extreme example. But to do it in 8 weeks, to go from saying this is brilliant, this is just what we need, to 8 weeks later saying the polar opposite is brilliant, the polar opposite is just what we need. I find it staggering. The more we talk, the more staggering I find it. Sometimes the opposite happens. So here I think is what is getting close now to a definitive list of cabinet ministers who have somehow managed to stay on the same staff as the butcher shop has turned into a vegan market. All right? Suella Braverman, James Cleverly, Ben Wallace, Therese Coffey, Nadeem Zahawi, Alistair Jack, and Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland guy. Where's he gone? Yeah, and Chris Heaton-Harris. So how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Penny Mordaunt, I forgot to say her. 7, 8 members of cabinet. I don't get it. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how it's been allowed to happen. Chris Philp, Chief Secretary of the Treasury under Truss, but attending cabinet but not cabinet level. So I'm leaving him off the list. I'm perhaps unfairly, but cabinet level. Cabinet, not just attending cabinet, but it's a slight difference, I think. Pete's in Bristol. Pete, what's going on?
So you want to know why people keep going back to Keith's, do you?
Yes.
And I think
not just going back to Keith's, but claiming that Keith's is still brilliant, despite the fact that it now sells the polar opposite of what it sold when they told us it was brilliant 8 weeks ago.
Because Keith has told everyone, if you don't keep supporting me, this shop's name is going to change to Jean-Francois, or it's going to change to Hans, or it's going to change to Mohammed. So you need to keep supporting me. You need to keep believing.
It might just change to Kia. It might just change to Kias.
Yeah, maybe. But they keep saying that the reason you have to support us is either because of the EU or because of the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and things like that.
Kias.
So it's basically just it's government's vibe.
I'd like you to mock you for resurrecting the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn, but of course Rishi Sunak's done it at every PMQs that he's conducted so far, so I can't mock you.
Apologies.
So here's the question. Here's the problem in many ways. What do they actually believe in?
What do they stand for?
Yeah.
The only thing they got left, which is step in line and do what you're told. We're doing tax cuts. Believe it. Go out there and sell it to the public. We're doing tax rises.
Yeah.
Believe it. You are with us or you are against us. And basically they've said that being against them will be the downfall of this country.
I mean, you're right, obviously, and you sound a bit more chilled than I am about it all. Are you not stunned? I mean, surprised, stunned, staggered? Because we can all hold politicians in low regard, and I think that's a mistake, actually, or it might be the hopium kicking in again, but I don't think it's healthy for a democracy to hold all politicians in the lowest regard. This is exceptionally bad. This 8-week window from up to down, from left to right, from one policy to the polar opposite of that policy is incredible, isn't it?
I ran out of hopium, unfortunately, quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And
are you on methadone?
Everything that's been going on, if I'm honest, the thing that shocked me the most is how much this country needs to grow some self-respect.
Yeah, I agree.
These people have been doing this for years. There are so many institutions.
I don't think they have. I don't think they have. Not on this speed and scale.
It's been sped up. I would agree. It's happening.
Well, give me another example then of a complete reverse ferret, like not just a wobble or a wibble, but an absolute reverse ferret.
I guess Patterson scandal.
No, it doesn't work. It's appalling behaviour, but it's not the same.
I mean, this is the latest and greatest. Things are happening like quicker and quicker. How long was Truss here for? I can't remember, a month or something like that.
Yeah.
When things are just happening quicker and quicker, things are just falling apart quicker and quicker, you just know it's near the end. But if you to get a wider perspective, just zoom out a little bit. This has been happening slowly but surely for a long time. And only now people are paying attention because we've got to the point.
So culmination rather than aberration in the context of this specific U-turn, I think we would disagree about. I think this is Because of the personnel. I don't know whether Rishi Sunak could have assembled an entirely different cabinet, whether he could have assembled a cabinet of Conservatives who were either quietly or courageously, publicly criticising what Liz Truss announced. If you found, imagine for a moment, close your eyes and imagine a dream universe where Suella Braverman, James Cleverly, Ben Wallace, Therese Coffey, Kemmer Badenoch, Nadeem Zahawi, Penny Mordaunt, Alistair Jack, any of them would agree to be interviewed by me, right? And I simply said, when it comes to tax and spending, what do you stand for? Now, what could they say?
I stand for what I am told to do.
Yeah, but you can't keep going back to that. They wouldn't say that. They'd try and say something else, wouldn't they?
If it's not being told what to do by their party, it's told what to do by their donors. Nothing makes sense anymore. We can dream up some crazy theories if we want to, but the simplest answer is normally the correct one.
Yeah. In terms of self-interest, I completely agree. I can't argue with you about that because the evidence is insurmountable. But I wonder in their own heads, what about a supporter then? There you go. That's a clever question for once. What about a supporter? What about somebody, listening to this and thinking, I would send him a text, but I don't want to be an idiot's corner and go, lefties, can't really explain what he's got wrong, but down with him and he's probably a communist. What do they stand for when it comes to tax and spending? They were cheering the Daily Mail front page 8 weeks ago, and they're cheering what Jeremy Hunt's about to announce later today because they're Tories. They know they are, they're sure they are, they're Tories till they die. What do they stand for when it comes to tax and spending?
These people are only human. We all are extremely busy. We do our own work. These people voted for something which they were told was going to be in their self-interest. They've now found out that
You're going back to Brexit now.
It doesn't even have to be that. It
kind
could just be the tuition fees or even the austerity for the NHS. And stuff. I think most people could probably agree that we probably should have kept the funding for the NHS because of nurses and things like that. We're all very busy. People just voted what they voted for, and it's human self-preservation. They don't want to say they were wrong. So this is you say compassion for the
contempt for the con men, compassion for the con. Don't say it with a sneer in your voice, Pete. It's a beautiful mantra that we should all live by.
I forgot how you said it, and you say it so eloquently.
Thank you. I'll say it again in my special voice. Contempt for the con men, compassion for the con.
I am well past contempt of con men.
I'm getting there as well. If you're still conned, then you've become part of the con. You've ceased to be a victim of the con. It's a bit like in a Ponzi scheme when you then turn into a salesperson, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to sign up 20 mates for I don't know, makeup or Tupperware or something like that. Actually, Tupperware's a trade name. I shouldn't have said that. Apologies. Plastic boxes.
So I think just some compassion for our fellow countrymen. And we just have to talk about what we all care about, which is health, family, things like that. But we've got to get rid of these guys, please.
Well, there it is, which is why the mythical contributor. You're very good, Pete. A lot of praise for you coming in on the text, but I still cling to this belief, this notion, this hope that there is an answer to the code. What do they stand for? Could they say something like, well, we stand for low taxes and low public spending, but only when circumstances allow, in which case you'd be like, well, it was 8 weeks ago that you said circumstances did allow for that. What's changed? To which the only admissible answer is, well, we blew up the economy. And the response to that is, how can the Cabinet have 8 people in it that were part of that project then? If the new project is at least in part defined by the need to fix the damage that you did 8 weeks ago, how can the Cabinet still have 8 people in it? What's the point of a government if it contains the same people when it enacts the polar opposite policy of the one that it enacted 8 weeks ago? It's actually very serious. I'm grateful to Pete and to everyone else who's rung in for keeping the spirits high and the tone quite light. But it's incredibly serious. It's yet another illustration of just how completely crackers everything is, how broken British politics has become. Thankfully, we get to spend every morning in each other's company, and we can keep a smile on each other's face, because the only other alternative is to sort of exist on a diet of gristle and start screaming that you want everybody else to shut up. Oh, it's all so doom and gloom. It's all so miserable. Oh, how dare you talk about Brexit. Please don't remind me of the time that I pooed in my hands and started clapping in public, claiming that it was a brilliant thing for the entire country. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, listen, love him or loathe him, and I have to say, I've always found him very odd on the rare occasions that I've encountered him. But when he came in to do some of my holiday cover, he was charming to my colleagues. And did you like him? Did you like him? I know you did. You did. Was that just a shrug? I mean, compared to Matt Hancock, right? He was lovely. That goes without saying. But Jeremy Hunt made a very good impression on my colleagues, which counts with me. You know, I'm not wearing my scarf so tightly around my neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to my head. I've always found him odd. But hey, I'm sure he finds me odd, so that doesn't really count. But love him or loathe him, you want him to do well today. You know, this talk of a £50 billion black hole is disingenuous, to say the least. But the recognition of the problems that the country faces is clearly not. So spending cuts is a terrifying phrase in the context of where we are now. Can you think of any area of the public sector that is currently in receipt of what you consider to be too much money? And I don't mean, yes, I can. I've read a story and it's far too much money. I mean, in terms of the service being provided. So you go to a service provider, a public service provider, whether it's a hospital or a police force or a fire service or a social worker. You go to a public service provider and you think, crikey, they've got way too much going on. They've got way too much money cut. They've got way too much staff. I can't believe how many appointments there are going spare at my local GPs. I mean, look how many coppers there are. I got burgled last week. There were 40 coppers round before I'd even put the phone down. Do you see what I mean? Is there any area of the public sector that you look at the moment and think that has got money coming out of its ears? Look at that. We can definitely cut some of that back. You might make arguments about efficiency, and Jeremy Hunt almost certainly will. But they're wonderful arguments about efficiency because they're vague, they're nebulous, they're almost impossible to pin. We will save X billion pounds from this budget without any loss of quality of service. Oh yeah, go on then. Like that time you got rid of loads of coppers and crime rates didn't go up. How did that work out for you? So just have a little think about public services. Teachers, you know, going to a school. So flipping heck. I went into a school the other day. There was teachers queuing up around the block to get into a classroom. I mean, honestly, it was one teacher per pupil. I was in there the other day. There's so many teachers. And it was so warm in there. And everyone was eating free school meals. And all of the extracurricular activities. They had an orchestra, a bouncy castle and a swimming pool. I went into this school the other day. It was like a cross between Alton Towers and the Ritz Hotel. Like, my kids' you should go to my kids' school. It's just no one says that in the publicly funded areas of our country. I go into a hospital. It was marvellous. All these beds are empty. They've got so much room for new patients. Phone the police. I couldn't believe how quickly they came round. And they caught the fella. They caught the crook. What had robbed me? So £30 billion worth of cuts to what we've currently got, right? How's that going to work? Partly through raising taxes, which is fine. It's fine for me. All right, I thought it was disgusting when Liz Truss gave me a break. I really did. I thought it was just unbelievable. Of all the unbelievable things in that so-called budget, it was by far the most morally or emotionally offensive. In terms of actual money, it wasn't a particularly big deal, which is why they could backtrack from that before they backtrack from the whole shebang. They sliced that bit off the top of it. But the idea of giving me a break in the context of the cost of living crisis or the energy bills or whatever I just found that almost impossible to understand. And I know well the ghoulish, vampiric ideologies of Tufton Street that informed Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's thinking. I know what they stand for, so I knew where it would lead. I just couldn't believe it when they actually did it in public. So that's great. I can afford it. Touch wood. You know, till LBC come to their senses and give me a sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap moment. I'll be flogging board games like it's going out of fashion. I'll have to write another book. But I can afford it, so I'll take it. I won't just take it on the chin. I think we should try, if we can, to be proud of paying tax. I always remember Alan Sugar, who I think is an absolute clown in many, many ways, but he did once post a picture of his income tax, and it was a huge sum of money that he was paying in income tax. That, for me, should get you into the House of Lords. You pay epic amounts of money in income tax, publish your tax returns, and and the biggest payers of income tax, with some checks and balances. You couldn't, for example, be the son of a KGB spy. However much income tax you paid, that wouldn't get you into the House of Lords. But the biggest payers, every year, the top 10 payers of income tax, on-the-nose income tax, seat in the House of Lords. You know how you get a seat in the House of Lords? Avoid tax, give a bunch of money to the Tory party. That gets you a seat in the House of Lords. So we should try at least to engender some sense of pride in paying income tax. And I'll be doing that later today after presumably getting some, quotes, bad news from the Chancellor. So £24 billion worth of tax increases. The problem is, although it's an equivalent to 860 quid for every household, it will hit people who can least afford it harder than those who can afford it. It's a sort of stealth raid, if you like. I don't like the language here. Again, raid, it's military. But people are going to be dragged into higher rates or they're going to be required to pay tax for the first time. They'll be the lowest earners in the country, or among the lowest earners in the country. So strange old business, isn't it? But what's even stranger is the fact that the party introducing these policies and the people cheering them, if you can find anybody cheering them, are the same people that introduced the exact opposite just 8 weeks ago. And I still can't get my head around it. I can't get my head around it, and I can't get my head around how they're allowed to. A couple of people have pointed out the Boris Johnson double column. Isabel puts it best. It started to be obvious when Johnson wrote 2 columns, Remain or Leave, and then decided at the very last minute which option would help his own career the most. It probably started before that, but Johnson was so blatant. They stand entirely for themselves and not the country. Rishi Sunak, and again, hope this isn't the hopium kicking in, Rishi Sunak was pretty clear about what was wrong with Liz Truss's economic plans. And then she introduced them and he was proved completely right. So he was not, he was trying to get... he rises a little bit above Isabel's analysis because he stuck to his guns and he got proved completely right. So now he's immune from this criticism, by the way, as Prime Minister. But how has he ended up with a cabinet full of people who thought he was wrong when he described what would happen if we brought in Liz Truss's policies? That's the mess of it all. That's the horror of it all. They don't stand for anything. What's that Alexander Hamilton line? This is James Cleverly in a single phrase, right? Are you ready for this? This is James Cleverly and Suella Braverman in a single phrase. At 9 words to sum up the Conservative cabinet. When you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. There it is. They should have it tattooed across their foreheads. When you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. And if you stand for nothing, you can comfortably serve in 2 cabinets 2 months apart that represent polar opposite fiscal policy. Unbelievable. 11:11 is the time. Gary's in Letchworth. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
Hi, gentlemen. What I would like to say is, what do they stand for? Well, absolutely nothing.
That's war. That's what is war good for?
Yeah, absolutely nothing, and damage limitation.
Yeah.
In terms of footballification and an analogy, I would liken it to being a die-hard Arsenal supporter, losing a game, throwing your kit out and going and buying a Tottenham strip. That's what we're looking at right here. This is what they're going. In terms of where you can trace this corruption back to, you say Brexit. I go back one step further, and I would say the Scottish independence referendum.
Go on.
If you look at what they said to the Scots, your only way of staying in Europe was to vote to remain in the UK. They said things like it was a once in a generation vote. And once they've got the English to buy into this, the English are the ones who mainly support the Conservatives and prop up that government. Once we had believed in that once in a generation type of vote, then the corruption around things like Brexit was inevitable, because it's the thing that annoys me, the thing that makes me most sick of and embarrassed by our political system is that they can change their minds like the wind.
Yeah.
They can do whatever the hell they want. They can change. They can decide 50 billion tax cuts, 60 billion tax rises. No problem. We're allowed to do that. You say anything about, well, hold on a minute, that Brexit thing isn't working out quite so well. How about another referendum? Hold your Remainer tears, cry me a river and all that sort of malarkey, right? Get on with it, son, and pull up your big boy pants and whatever else they want to say. They can change their mind like the wind, and there's no right to recourse. There's nothing that we as the people, we're supposed to hold the power. There's nothing that we can do to say, hold on a minute, the opinion polls show that you will be decimated. We don't want you anymore, but we can't force a general election because we have to wait for you to call one. You're the ones carrying out these barbaric crimes of impoverishing people and people dying, 330 excess deaths due to coronavirus, etc., etc. Call them out for all of these things. There's nothing that we can do to make...
And that's impunity. You've just described impunity. So the mystery is solved in a way. It's not, the mystery of how they can, or why they do, or how they can live with themselves. These are questions for the ages. But the answer to the question of how can they get away with it is very simply that there are no consequences.
Yes. And
that's
that impunity is what disgusts me the most. And I hope that somewhere along the line, maybe not for the next couple of years, but somewhere along the line, there will be some mechanism put into our political system that will allow us to overturn this corruption, because this right now is nothing but damage limitation.
You made me think of Owen Paterson, so thanks for that. Because even when there were systems and regulations and checks and balances in place to ensure that when people did bad, there were consequences, this lot tried to set fire to them. Jacob Rees-Mogg tried to torch the whole system of standards to protect their cronies. It's utter and completely corrupt impunity. You're so right. So, they're not even thinking. They might say, that idiot on the radio. You, Gary, not me. That idiot Gary on the radio banging on about this, that and the other. They don't understand anything. Yeah, whatever. We'll do what we want, mate. Thanks very much. We'll do what we want.
Exactly. And that pleb, that's where class war comes into it, because that right of just feeling like you're right to govern, that's where that comes into it. But there being no right for recourse. And as you brought up, what do you call Jacob Rees-Mogg? The mule in pencil? I love that name. I love that name, by the way. That's great, mate. I love that. But for people like him, for people like him, he can do whatever he wants. He can say whatever nonsense he wants. And
he was claiming this week or last week that if we hadn't left the European Union, we wouldn't have been able to help Ukraine.
I mean, come on.
I know. I was actually sitting with the foreign minister of the Czech Republic last night, talking to him about how much help they've offered to Ukraine, and there was a room full of politicians from all over Eastern Europe, and the idea, the fact that he can say that, and albeit on one of these new weird channels that should really be showing cartoons, but he still says it in public. Can I just
explore one thing on
briefly?
A point on that? Well, if being in the European Union is so bad, then why do Ukraine want to join it?
Just take the win. Seriously, don't say anything else. I'm going to leave it hanging.
Thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you. An awful lot of love coming in for you as well, Gary, by the way.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Almost made up for Mystery Hour. Such a good caller is probably the highest compliment that you've been paid. If the European Union is so awful, why are Ukraine so desperate to join it? And of course, that question is probably the reason why Nigel Farage has started. And I apologise for bringing this to your attention. You probably rather enjoy not being aware of whatever it is that he's up to at the moment. But he has now started going after, wait for it, Volodymyr Zelensky. Why does he hate this country so much? Ooh, 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Are we going to have time for any more calls? Chris and Paul are waiting, but Theo Usherwood has just moonwalked into the studio. I don't. I tell you what, Chris and Paul, let's try and do I know this is pot kettle black territory, and a hypocrisy that I'm about to unveil on the nation is frankly off the scale. But you need to be very, very brief. So give me your point in a nutshell, Chris, if you would.
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Chris, first time caller, nervous.
Oh, well, then don't worry about the nutshell then. Theo can wind his neck in. You take your time, Chris.
You asked the question which public services are getting too much money, and I've got a couple of examples.
Oh, go on then.
Well, the NHS is being bled by the private sector. All the money that's going to private hospitals. I was a psychiatric social worker.
Oh.
And that's money that goes from the NHS into private places like the Priory and Signet hospitals, providing rubbish services.
Well, hang on, I don't know that. I mean, they would dispute that. You can't just come on and sort of. I thought you were nervous. I think you've just libelled a massive medical empire. Obviously, this is solely Chris's opinion, and I'm sure that all of the people that she's just mentioned would furiously dispute her analysis. So I'm more than happy to point that out. God, I'd hate to hear you when you weren't nervous. What?
James, the bed is the other side of the country. People have sent hundreds of miles, and that costs money as well.
Listen, I know and you know that the question I asked was about is there anywhere where giving less money would improve service? So although you're I know you've correctly identified something that is not desirable. I'm not a fan of any of the things you've described, but in terms of saying, and we're now going to give less money to the NHS without making any policy announcements about what gets hived off to the private sector or any of the things you've alluded to. That's not going to get better, is it? It's going to get worse.
You can give less money to the NHS if they open their own beds and stop being bled by the private sector.
But they're not going to announce. Well, maybe they will announce that. We'll find out.
Just open the beds within house, keep it in house, and stop letting private companies make money out of misery.
The bacon slicer, Chris. They've always got to be able to slice a little bit off for their mates, whatever it is. That's why there's elements of this country that they absolutely hate. They look at it. I remember sitting in this studio years ago. Finally, the penny dropped on what it's all about, this whole free market vampiric ideology. It's all about hating anything that sees money travel from taxpayer to treasury to taxpayer without any of it being sliced off in commission for a big private company or some shareholders or some nice dividends. Water, we pay for it, we pay our water rates, we turn our taps on, the water comes out. That's just outrageous. Where's the profit? Where's the profit for our pals? Answer, let's privatise the water companies. Energy, that's just ridiculous. Nationalised energy. Where's the profit for our pals? So she's right, that's why they hate the NHS. And the thing I suspect they walk past, this is a weird one, allotments. Municipal allotments. It's a slightly partridgey departure, this, from don't look at me like that, Theo. Municipal allotments. Well, people, I bet you that this lot walk past municipal allotments and think, there's some just normal people there who are growing vegetables on grounds that could be luxury apartments. It's just, they hate allotments, Theo.
Really?
First they came for the allotments, and you didn't do anything because you didn't have an allotment. What are they going to come for next?
I don't know. The allotments.
Would you like to talk about the autumn statement, Theo?
It's slightly safer territory for me, just because Rishi Sunak is...
Why do you hate allotments, Theo?
I don't hate allotments. Allotments are... I know people who have allotments. There's a really nice set of allotments.
Go on, let's go.
Anyway, just to start with, Rishi Sunak has been in front of MPs in the House of Commons, just updating them on his trip to Bali for the G20 summit. And he's been asked by Keir Starmer about his talks with President Modi of India, particularly around... a trade deal, and of course we know what the Home Secretary Suella Braverman, her opposition to providing more visas to India for Indians to come to this country, and the difficulties that caused, potentially, it came very close to actually completely undermining that trade deal. Keir Starmer has been asking the Prime Minister about his position.
This deal has previously been put in doubt by his Home Secretary, indicating she would not support it. Labour does support a trade deal with India. We believe this can bring new opportunities to promote and create new jobs here in Britain. So can he tell us when he now expects this deal to be completed? And if measures on visas will be included in the overall deal? And if so, could he guarantee his whole cabinet will actually support it?
That question elicited this response from Rishi Sunak.
I think the broad overarching comment I would make to him is, when it comes to trade deals, whoever they may be with, what I won't do is sacrifice quality for speed. I think it is important.
Yes.
Is Liz Truss in the House?
Not that I saw then, but also it's, of course, riposte to...
Pretty obvious swing at her.
Yes, and also to George Eustice.
Although he was Chancellor, wasn't he, when that trade deal with Australia got signed?
I'd need to check, because, of course, he left a bit... yes, he probably was, actually.
No, of course he was.
Yes.
So Chancellor of the Exchequer,
yes.
The man in charge of the
But he's
purse
now in charge,
strings,
because he's now Prime Minister.
having a swing at the woman who negotiated the trade deal with Australia,
Yes.
even though he was Chancellor.
And, of course,
went along with it.
And also, whilst he was away, George Eustice, who was Environment...
Broken.
George Eustice, who was Environment Secretary,
Yeah.
was behind the trade deal with Australia and then turned around this week and said it wasn't a very
they're all
good
slagging
trade
it
deal.
off. Front page of the Daily Telegraph today, given that Suella Braverman's objection to the India trade deal would be the number. India, by far the highest number of visas for people coming into this country already. That's before the trade deal. A surge in early retirement and long-term sickness has left Britain facing a unique labour force shock among rich nations. Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, said yesterday the UK is the only industrialised economy to have suffered a sharp fall in its workforce since the pandemic. Wow.
Yeah.
And he was blaming price rises on fewer workers, as well as supply bottlenecks. I wonder what could have caused them, and the Ukraine war.
So moving on, of course, to the autumn statement, which starts in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Jeremy Hunt is going to be doing this on the basis of OBR figures. And of course, you'll remember when we had that mini budget on September the 23rd, there were no numbers to back it up from the Office for Budget Responsibility, because Kwasi Kwarteng
refused.
And Liz Truss had the ability to do it. The OBR said they could have done the analysis, but they refused to do so. Now
it's a bit like handing in your homework
Yes.
and insisting that the teacher doesn't mark it.
Yes.
And then claiming that you got an A star.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then finally it got marked by
So-
the markets.
Yes, it got marked. Yes, I mean the market sort of took it and ripped it up, and the dog ate it. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, but that when we get to the Jeremy Hunt autumn statement, that's going to be at the start of the statement. You're going to get the OBR numbers, the breakdown in terms of what they forecast in terms of economic growth. And crucially, from Jeremy Hunt and from Rishi Sunak's point of view, this is about making the numbers add up, filling that black hole of circa £60 billion.
Which is a disputed figure of speech, actually, the black hole. There is a fairly compelling piece, I think, in The Guardian explaining why it could be. It's a bit of cloak and mirror, possibly designed just to usher in a new era of austerity, and some people have suggested then allow Rishi Sunak to suddenly pull some tax cuts out of the hat before a general election. I don't know about that.
But the argument is that if, of course, you front load the tax increases and spending cuts, then by the time you get to the election, the economy will be in a better position. Then you can do a sort of war chest sort of reduction in taxes, but we're expecting look out for what happens to the thresholds at which you start paying the basic rate of tax, the threshold at which you start paying the higher rate of tax, and of course which we expect to be frozen, raising billions for the Treasury. Inheritance tax, that's going to be frozen. And then what happens to that top rate of tax, 45 pence in the pound? That was what Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss wanted to abolish. They had to U-turn on that, and actually what we're now probably going to see is that threshold where it kicks in at 45p in the pound, kicks in at £150,000, could well be dropped down to £125,000, and that would bring in around 250,000 people paying that highest rate of tax. And all of this, of course, is designed to increase the amount of money going into the Treasury. At the same time, there are going to be some fairly painful spending cuts as well to come.
You can watch, if you want to, in glorious Technicolor, the autumn statement live on Global Player. I mean, it is 8 weeks since many members of this cabinet were claiming that tax cuts would increase the amount of money going into the Treasury.
Yes. So you're going to ask me who was in that?
No, I've got the list. Can you think of any others? Do you want to play this game?
Well, we've got James Clevertree's coffee. They spring to mind.
Right, we're crossing live now to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt. Also, holiday cover on this programme.
Mr. Speaker, in the face of unprecedented global headwinds, families, pensioners, businesses, teachers, nurses and many others are worried about the future. So today we deliver a plan to tackle the cost of living crisis and rebuild our economy. Our priorities are stability, growth and public services. We also protect the vulnerable, because to be British is to be compassionate, and this is a compassionate Conservative government. We are not alone in facing these problems, but today we respond to an international crisis with British values. We are honest about the challenges and we are fair in our solutions. Yes, we take difficult decisions to tackle inflation and keep mortgage rates down. But our plan also leads to a shallower downturn, lower energy bills, higher growth, and a stronger NHS and education system. Three priorities then today: stability, growth, and public services. I start with stability. Mr. Speaker, high inflation is the enemy of stability. It means higher mortgage rates, more expensive food and fuel bills, businesses failing and unemployment rising. It erodes savings, causes industrial unrest and cuts funding for public services. It hurts the poorest the most and eats away at the trust upon which a strong society is built. The Office for Budget Responsibility confirms global factors are the primary cause of current inflation. Most countries are still dealing with the fallout from a once-in-a-century pandemic. The furlough scheme, the vaccine rollout and the response of the NHS did our country proud, but they all have to be paid for. The lasting impact on supply chains has made goods more expensive and fueled inflation, and this has been worsened by a made-in-Russia energy crisis. Putin's war in Ukraine has caused wholesale gas and electricity prices to rise to 8 times their historic average. Inflation is high here, but higher in Germany, the Netherlands and Italy. Interest rates have risen here, but faster in the US, Canada and New Zealand. Growth forecasts have fallen here, but fallen further in Germany. The International Monetary Fund expects 1/3 of the world's economy to be in recession this year or next. So the Bank of England, which has done an outstanding job since its independence, now has my wholehearted support in its mission to defeat inflation. And I today confirm we will not change its remit. But we need fiscal and monetary policy to work together. And that means the government and the bank working in lockstep. It means, in particular, giving the world confidence in our ability to pay our debts. British families make sacrifices every day to live within their means, and so too must their government, because the United Kingdom will always pay its way. I understand the motivation of my predecessor's mini-budget, and he was correct. He was correct to identify growth as a priority. But unfunded tax cuts are as risky as unfunded spending, which is why we reversed the planned measures. As a result, government borrowing has fallen, the pound has strengthened, and the OBR says today that the lower interest rates generated by the government's actions are already benefiting our economy and public finances. But, Mr. Speaker, credibility cannot be taken for granted. And yesterday's inflation figures show we must continue a relentless fight to bring it down, including a rock-solid commitment to rebuild our public finances. Richard Hughes and his team at the OBR today lay out starkly the impact of global headwinds on the UK economy, and I'm enormously grateful to him and his team for their thorough work. The OBR forecast the UK's inflation rate to be 9.1% this year and 7.4% next year. They confirm that our actions today help inflation to fall sharply from the middle of next year. They also judge that the UK, like other countries, is now in recession. Overall this year, the economy is still forecast to grow by 4.2%. GDP then falls in 2023 by 1.4%, before rising by 1.3%, 2.6% and 2.7% in the following 3 years. The OBR says higher energy prices explain the majority of the downward revision in cumulative growth since March. They also expect a rise in unemployment from 3.6% today to 4.9% in 2024, before falling to 4.1%. Today's decisions mean that over the next 5 years, borrowing is more than halved. This year, we're forecast to borrow 7.1% of GDP, or £177 billion. Next year, 5.5% of GDP, or £140 billion. Then by 2027-28, it falls to 2.4% of GDP, or £69 billion. As a result, underlying debt as a percentage of GDP starts to fall from a peak of 97.6% in 2025-6 to 97.3% in 27-28. I also confirmed 2 new fiscal rules. The first is that underlying debt must fall as a percentage of GDP by the 5th year of a rolling 5-year period. The second, that public sector borrowing over the same period must be below 3% of GDP. And the plan I'm announcing today meets both rules. Today's statement delivers a consolidation of £55 billion and means inflation and interest rates end up significantly lower. We achieve this, Mr. Speaker, in a balanced way. In the short term, as growth slows and unemployment rises, we will use fiscal policy to support the economy. The OBR confirm that because of our plans, the recession is shallower and inflation is reduced. Unemployment is also lower, with about 70,000 jobs saved as a result of our decisions today. Then, once growth returns, we increase the pace of consolidation to get debt falling. This further reduces the pressure on the bank to raise interest rates, because as Conservatives, we do not leave our debts to the next generation. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a balanced path to stability, tackling inflation to reduce the cost of living and protect pensioner savings whilst supporting the economy on a path to growth. But it means taking difficult decisions. Anyone who says there are easy answers is not being straight with the British people. Some argue for spending cuts, but that would not be compatible with high-quality public services. Others say savings should be found by increasing taxes, but Conservatives know that high-tax economies damage enterprise and erode freedom. We want low taxes and sound money, but Conservatives know sound money has to come first, because inflation eats away at the pound in people's pockets even more insidiously than taxes. So with just under half of the £55 billion consolidation coming from tax, and just over half from spending, this is a balanced plan for stability. I turn first to our decisions on tax. I have tried to be fair by following 2 broad principles. Firstly, we ask those with more to contribute more, and secondly, we avoid the tax rises that damage growth. Although my decisions today do lead to a substantial tax increase, we have not raised headline rates of taxation, and tax as a percentage of GDP will increase by just 1% over the next 5 years. I start with personal taxes. Asking more from those who have more means that the first difficult decision I take on tax is to reduce the threshold at which the 45p rate becomes payable from £150,000 to £125,140. Those earning £150,000 or more will pay just over £1,200 more in tax every year. We're also taking difficult decisions on tax-free allowances. I'm maintaining at current levels the income tax personal allowance, higher rate threshold, main national insurance thresholds, and the inheritance tax thresholds for a further 2 years, taking us to April 2028. Even after that, we'll still have the most generous set of tax-free allowances of any G7 country. I'm also reforming allowances on unearned income. The dividend allowance will be cut from £2,000 to £1,000 next year and then to £500 from April 24. The annual exempt amount for capital gains tax will be cut from £12,300 to £6,000 next year and then £3,000 from April 24. These changes still leave us with more generous allowances than countries like Germany, Ireland, France and Canada. Because the OBR forecast half of all new vehicles will be electric by 2025, to make our motoring tax system fairer, I've decided that from then, electric vehicles will no longer be exempt from vehicle excise duty. Company car tax rates will remain lower for electric vehicles, and I've listened to industry bodies and will limit rate increases to 1 percentage point a year for 3 years from 2025. The OBR expects housing activity to slow over the next 2 years, so the stamp duty cuts announced in the mini-budget will remain in place, but only until the 31st of March 2025. After that, I will sunset the measure, creating an incentive to support the housing market and the jobs associated with it by boosting transaction during the period the economy most needs it. I now turn to business taxes. While I've decided to freeze the employer's NICS threshold until April 2028, we will retain the employment allowance at its new higher level of £5,000. This means 40% of all businesses will pay no NICS at all. The VAT threshold is already more than twice as high as the EU and OECD averages. I will maintain it at that level until March 26. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, successfully negotiated a landmark international tax deal to make sure multinational corporations, including big tech companies, pay the right tax in the countries they operate. I will implement these reforms, making sure the UK gets our fair share. Yeah. Alongside further measures to tackle tax avoidance and evasion, this will raise an additional £2.8 billion by 27-28. I've also heard concerning reports of abuse and fraud in R&D tax relief for SMEs, so I've decided today to cut the deduction rate for the SME scheme to 86% and the credit rate to 10%, but increase the rate of the separate R&D expenditure credit from 13% to 20%. Despite raising revenue, the OBR have confirmed that these measures have no detrimental impact on the level of R&D investment in the economy. Ahead of the next budget, we'll work with industry to understand what further support R&D intensive SMEs may require. Next, windfall taxes. I have no objection to windfall taxes if they are genuinely about windfall profits caused by unexpected increases in energy prices. But I know the honourable members opposite are getting excited at the talk of windfall taxes. Can I just say that any such tax should be temporary, not deter investment, and recognise the cyclical nature of energy businesses. So, taking account of this, I've decided that from January the 1st until March 28, we will increase the energy profits levy from 25 to 35%. The structure of our energy market also creates windfall profits for low-carbon electricity generation. So from January the 1st, we've decided to introduce a new temporary 45% levy on electricity generators. Together, these measures raise £14 billion next year. Finally, I turn to business rates. It's an important principle that bills should accurately reflect market values. So we'll proceed with the revaluation of business properties from April 23. But I will soften the blow on businesses with a nearly £14 billion tax cut over the next 5 years Nearly 2/3 of properties will not pay a penny more next year, and thousands of pubs, restaurants and small high street shops will benefit. This will include a new government-funded transitional relief scheme, as called for by the CBI, the British Retail Consortium, the Federation of Small Businesses and others, benefiting around 700,000 businesses. Mr. Speaker, our plan for the cost of living delivers lower inflation, lower mortgage rates, a shallower downturn and lower unemployment. But it also involves public spending discipline. So I turn next to how we protect public services through a challenging period. The Prime Minister's vision for this country has at its heart a strong NHS and world-class education. We know that a strong economy depends on strong public services, so we will protect them as much as we can as we deliver our plan for stability and growth. We do have to take difficult decisions on public finances, so we're going to grow public spending, but we're going to grow it more slowly than the growth in the economy. For the remaining 2 years of the spending review, we'll protect the increases in departmental budgets we've already set out in cash terms, and then grow resource spending at 1% a year in real terms in the 3 years that follow. Although departments will have to make efficiencies to deal with inflationary pressures in the next 2 years, this decision means overall spending in public services will continue to rise in real terms for the next 5 years. Before I turn to our plan for schools and the NHS, I start with 2 other areas of spending. The Department for Work and Pensions has a critical role in supporting people into work, and I am proud to live in a country with one of the most comprehensive safety nets anywhere in the world. But I am also concerned that we've seen a sharp increase in economically inactive working-age adults of around 630,000 people since the start of the pandemic. Employment levels have yet to return to pre-pandemic levels, which is bad for businesses who cannot fill vacancies and bad for people missing out on the opportunity to do well for themselves and their families. So the Prime Minister has asked the Work and Pensions Secretary to do a thorough review of issues holding back workforce participation to conclude early in the new year. Alongside this, I am also committed to helping people already in work to raise their incomes, progress in work, and become financially independent. So we will ask over 600,000 more people on universal credit to meet with a work coach so that they can get the support they need to increase their hours or earnings. I've also decided to move back the managed transition of people from employment and support allowance onto universal credit to 2028, and will invest an extra £280 million in DWP to crack down on benefit fraud and error over the next 2 years. And the government's review of the state pension age will also be published in early 2023. Our security at home depends on our security overseas. So I turn next to defence and other international commitments. The privilege of being this country's Foreign Secretary showed me firsthand the enormous respect in which this country is held, because the United Kingdom is and has always been a force for good in the world. Nothing sums that up more than the courage of our armed forces, men and women who risk their lives every day in defence of our territory and our belief in freedom. Alongside them, I salute the citizens of another country right on the front line of that fight today, the brave people of Ukraine. The United Kingdom has given their military support worth £2.3 billion since the start of Putin's invasion, the second highest contribution in the world after the United States, which demonstrates that our commitment to democracy and open societies remains steadfast. In that context, the Prime Minister and I both recognise the need to increase defence spending. But before we make that commitment, it's necessary to revise and update the integrated review, written as it was before the Ukraine invasion. And I've asked for that vital work to be completed ahead of the next budget, and today confirm we will continue to maintain the defence budget at least 2% of GDP to be consistent with our NATO commitment. Another important international commitment is to overseas aid. The OBR's forecasts show a significant shock to public finances, so it won't be possible to return to the 0.7% target until the fiscal situation allows. We remain fully committed to that target, and the plans that I've set out today assume that ODA spending will remain around 0.5% for the forecast period. As a percentage of GNI, we were the third highest donor in the G7 last year, and I am proud our aid commitment has saved thousands of lives around the world. So I look forward to working closely with my right honourable friend, the member for Sutton Coldfield, now rightly back in his place in Cabinet, to make sure we continue to play a leadership role in tackling global poverty. The United Kingdom has also been a global leader on climate change, cutting emissions by more than any other G20 country. But with the existential vulnerability we face, now would be the wrong time to step back from our international climate responsibilities. So I also confirm that despite the economic pressures, we remain fully committed to the historic Glasgow Climate Pact agreed at COP26, including a 68% reduction in our own emissions by 2030. I turn to education. Mr. Speaker, being pro-education is being pro-growth. But providing our children with a good education is not just an economic mission, it's a moral mission, one to which my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has always been deeply committed. Thanks to the efforts of successive Conservative education secretaries, particularly my right honourable friends from Surrey Heath and from Bognor Regis, we have risen 9 places in the global league tables for maths and reading in the last 7 years. I still, however, have concerns that not all school leavers get the skills they need for a modern economy. But for the first time ever, this country has a Conservative education secretary who left school at 16 to become an apprentice and knows firsthand why good skills matter. There are many important initiatives in place, but as Chancellor, I want to know the answer to one simple question. Will every young person leave the education system with the skills they would get in Japan, Germany or Switzerland? So I've appointed Sir Michael Barber to advise me and my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, on the implementation of our skills reform programme. As we raise the skill levels of our school leavers, I want also to ensure that even in an economic crisis, the improvement in school standards continues to accelerate. Some have suggested putting VAT on independent school fees as a way of increasing core funding for schools, which would raise about £1.7 billion. But according to certain estimates, that would result in up to 90,000 children from the independent sector switching to state schools, giving with one hand only to take away with another. So instead of being ideological, I'm going to be practical. Because we want school standards to continue to rise for every single child, we're going to do more than protect the school's budget. We're going to increase it. And I can announce today that next year and the year after, we will invest an extra £2.3 billion per annum in our schools. Our message to heads and teachers and classroom assistants is thank you for your brilliant work. We need it to continue, and in difficult economic circumstances, a Conservative government is investing more in the public service that defines all our futures. Mr. Speaker, the service we depend on more than any other is the NHS. As a former Health Secretary, I know how hard people are working on the front line and how much they're struggling after the pandemic. The biggest issues are workforce shortages and pressures in the social care sector. So today I address them both. On staff shortages, the former chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee put forward a case for a long-term workforce plan. He even wrote a book about it, which I've read. I've listened carefully to his proposals, and I believe they have merit. So the Department of Health and Social Care and the NHS will publish an independently verified plan for the number of doctors, nurses and other professionals we'll need in 5, 10 and 15 years' time, taking full account of the need for better retention and productivity improvements. I've also listened to extensive representations about the challenges facing the social care sector. It did a heroic job looking after children, disabled adults and older people during the pandemic. Its 1.6 million employees work incredibly hard, but even outside the pandemic, the increasing number of over 80s is putting massive pressure on their services. I also heard very real concerns from local authorities, particularly about their ability to deliver the Dilnot reforms immediately. So I will delay the implementation of this important reform for 2 years, allocating the funding to allow local authorities to provide more care packages. I also want the social care system to help free up some of the 13,500 hospital beds that are occupied by those who should be at home. So I've decided to allocate for adult social care additional grant funding of £1 billion next year and £1.7 billion the year after. Combined with savings from the delayed Dilnot reforms and more council tax flexibilities, this means an increase in funding available for the social care sector of up to £2.8 billion next year and £4.7 billion the year after. That's a big increase. But how we look after our most vulnerable citizens is not just a practical issue. It speaks to our values as a society. So today's decision will allow the social care system to deliver an estimated 200,000 more care packages over the next 2 years, the biggest increase in funding under any government of any colour in history. The NHS budget has been increased to record levels to deal with the pandemic. And today I'm asking the NHS to join all public services in tackling waste and inefficiency. We want Scandinavian quality alongside Singaporean efficiency, both better outcomes for citizens and better value for taxpayers. That does not mean asking people on the front line, often exhausted and burned out, to work harder, which would not be possible or fair. But it does mean asking challenging questions about how to reform all our public services for the better. So with respect to the NHS, I've asked former Health Secretary and Chair of the Norfolk and Waveney Integrated Care System, Patricia Hewitt, to help me and the Health Secretary achieve that by advising us on how to make sure the new integrated care boards, the local NHS bodies, operate efficiently and with appropriate autonomy and accountability. I've also had discussions with NHS England about the inflationary pressures on their budget. I recognise that efficiency savings alone will not be enough to deliver the services we all need. So because of difficult decisions taken elsewhere today, I will increase the NHS budget in each of the next 2 years by £3.3 billion. The Chief Executive of the NHS, Amanda Pritchard, has said that this should provide sufficient funding for the NHS to fulfil its key priorities. She said it shows the government is serious about its commitment to prioritise our NHS. 3.3 billion for the NHS, £4.7 billion for social care, a record £8 billion package for our health and care system. That is a Conservative government putting the NHS first. Mr. Speaker, the NHS and schools in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland face equivalent pressures. So the Barnett consequentials of today's decisions mean an extra £1.5 billion for the Scottish Government, £1.2 billion for the Welsh Government, £650 million for the Northern Ireland Executive. That is more resources for the schools and hospitals in our devolved nations next year, the year after, and every year thereafter. Mr. Speaker, our support for public services means that despite needing to find £55 billion in savings and tax rises, we are protecting the amount going into public services in real terms over the 5-year period. But if we're going to sustain our public services and avoid a doom loop of ever higher taxes and ever lower dynamism, we need economic growth. So I now turn, well, they've never been interested in growth, but we on this side of the House
I want to get to the end of the budget statement like the rest of the people of this country. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let's start with a difficult message for the party opposite. You cannot borrow your way to growth. Sound money is the rock. Sound money is the rock upon which long-term prosperity rests. But it isn't enough on its own. Our plan is designed to build a high-wage, high-skill economy that leads to long-term prosperity. In his May's lecture, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister identified the keys to doing this: people, capital and ideas. Today's increase in the education budget demonstrates our commitment to people and skills. And I now outline 3 further growth priorities: energy, infrastructure and innovation. Cheap, low-carbon, reliable energy must sit at the heart of any modern economy. But Putin's weaponisation of international gas prices has helped drive the cost of our national energy consumption right up. This year we'll be spending an extra £150 billion on energy compared to pre-pandemic levels, equivalent to paying for an entire second NHS through our energy bills. In 2019, a third of global emissions came from energy supply. So unless we act radically to change our approach, we'll both bankrupt our economy and harm our planet. Over the long term, there's only one way to stop ourselves being at the mercy of international gas prices: energy independence combined with energy efficiency. Energy independence, so neither Putin nor anyone else can use energy to blackmail us, and energy efficiency to reduce demand and climate impact as much as possible. Now, Britain is a global leader in renewable energy. Last year, nearly 40% of our electricity came from offshore wind, solar and other renewables. Since 2010, our renewable energy production has grown faster than any other large country in Europe. But we need to go even further with a major acceleration of homegrown technologies like offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and above all, nuclear. This will deliver new jobs, industries and export opportunities and secure the clean, affordable energy we need to power our future economy and reach net zero. So today I can announce the government will proceed with a new nuclear power plant at Sizewell C. Subject to final government approvals, the contracts for the initial investment will be signed with relevant parties, including EDF, in the coming weeks. This will create 10,000 highly skilled jobs and provide reliable, low-carbon power to the equivalent of 6 million homes for 50 years. Our £700 million investment is the first state backing for a nuclear project in over 30 years and represents the biggest step in our journey to energy independence. But, Mr. Speaker, energy efficiency is just as important. So today we set our country a new national ambition. By 2030, we want to reduce energy consumption from buildings and industry by 15%. Reducing demand by this much means, in today's prices, a £28 billion saving from our national energy bill, or £450 off the average household bill. This must be a shared mission, with families and businesses playing their part. But so will the government play our part. In this Parliament, we're already planning to invest in energy efficiency a total of £6.6 billion. Today I'm announcing new funding from 2025 of a further £6 billion, doubling our annual investment to deliver this new national ambition. Our commitment to the British people is over time to remove the single biggest driver of inflation and volatility facing British businesses and consumers. So my right honourable friend, the Business and Energy Secretary, will publish further details on our energy independence plans and launch a new energy efficiency task force shortly. Mr. Speaker, if a modern economy needs secure, clean and affordable energy, it also needs good roads, rail, broadband and 5G infrastructure. Such connections matter because they allow wealth and opportunity to spread to every corner of the country. And that is why infrastructure is our second growth priority. Thanks to decisions by this Conservative government, right now workers right across the country are building or maintaining thousands of miles of roads and railways, installing mobile masts and broadband cables to connect the remotest parts of rural Britain, building and repairing hospitals and constructing new wind turbines in the North Sea. When looking for cuts, capital is sometimes seen as an easy option, but doing so limits not our budgets, but our future. So today I can announce that I'm not cutting a penny from our capital budgets in the next 2 years and maintaining them at that level in cash terms for the following 3 years. That means that although we're not growing our capital budget as planned, it will still increase from £63 billion 4 years ago to £114 billion next year, £115 billion the year after, and remain at that level, more than double what it was under the last Labour government. Smart countries build on their long-term commitments rather than discard them. So today I confirm that because of this decision, alongside Sizewell C, we will deliver the core Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2 to Manchester, and East West Rail, and the new hospitals programme, and gigabit broadband rollout. All these and more will be funded as promised, with over £600 billion of investment over the next 5 years to connect our country and grow our economy. Our National Conservative mission is to level up economic opportunity across the country. And that too needs investment in infrastructure. So I will also proceed with round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund, at least matching the £1.7 billion value of round 1. We'll also drive growth across the UK by working with the Scottish Government on the feasibility study for the A75, supporting the Advanced Technology Research Centre in Wales, and funding a trade and investment event in Northern Ireland next year. But to unlock growth right across the country, we need to make it easier for local leaders to make things happen without banging on a Whitehall door. Our brilliant mayors, like Andy Street and Ben Houchen, have shown the power of civic entrepreneurship. We need more of this inspirational local leadership. So today I can announce a new devolution deal that will bring an elected mayor to Suffolk, and deals to bring mayors to Cornwall, Norfolk and an area in the North East to follow shortly. We're also making progress towards trailblazer devolution deals with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and West Midlands Combined Authority, and soon over half of England will be covered by devolution deals. Taken together, that £600 billion investment in our future growth represents the largest investment in public works for 40 years. So our children and grandchildren can be confident that this Conservative government is investing in their future. Energy and infrastructure. And now our third growth priority, innovation. Mr. Speaker, we have a national genius for innovation. Britain is the land of Newton, Darwin, Fleming, Faraday, Franklin, Gilbert and Berners-Lee, the home of 3 of the world's top 10 universities, the country with the largest life science and technology sectors in Europe. Thanks to successive Conservative governments, we remain a science superpower. And I salute the work of the former Chancellor George Osborne, my right honourable friend from Tunbridge Wells, and my honourable friend the Science Minister and member for Mid Norfolk, for laying the vital foundations to make this possible. 21st century economies will be defined by new developments in artificial intelligence, quantum technologies and robotics. But we need to be better at turning world-class innovation into world-class companies. So as a former entrepreneur, I had to get that in somewhere, I want to combine our technology and science brilliance with our formidable financial services to turn Britain into the world's next Silicon Valley. We learned from the success of Nigel Lawson's Big Bang in 1986 that smart regulatory reform can spur investment from all over the world. So today, using our Brexit freedoms, I confirm the next steps in our supply-side transformation. By the end of next year, we will decide and announce changes to EU regulations in our 5 growth industries: digital, life sciences, green industries, financial services and advanced manufacturing. And I've asked the Chief Scientific Officer, Sir Patrick Vallance, who did such a brilliant job in the pandemic, to lead our work on how to do this. The second lesson of Nigel Lawson's Big Bang is the most important driver of global success is not tax subsidies, but competition. So we will legislate to give the Digital Markets Unit new powers to challenge monopolies and increase the competitive pressure to innovate. To further spur competition, I've listened to requests from businesses, and today I'm removing import tariffs on over 100 goods used by UK businesses in their production processes, from car seat parts to bicycle frames. I'll also change our approach to investment zones, which will now focus on leveraging our research strengths by being centred on universities in left-behind areas to help build clusters for our new growth industries. My right honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, will work with mayors, devolved administrations and local partners to achieve this, with the first decisions announced ahead of the spring budget. I've heard some speculation that we might cut the research and development budget today, but I believe that would be a profound mistake. In our 2017 manifesto, we announced a target to invest 2.4% of our GDP in R&D, and the latest ONS data suggests the UK is close to meeting that target. I want to go further, so today I protect our entire research budget and confirm that we'll increase public funding for R&E to 20 billion by 24-25 as part of our mission to make the United Kingdom a science superpower. And finally, Nigel Lawson's Big Bang inspires us today, but nearly 40 years on, we must stay true to its mission to make the UK the world's most innovative and competitive global financial centre. So to further support investment across our economy, I also announced that we're publishing our decision on Solvency II, which will unlock tens of billions of pounds of investment for our growth-enhancing industries. 3 priorities for growth: energy security, investment in infrastructure, and a plan to turn the United Kingdom into the world's next Silicon Valley, transforming British intellectual genius into British commercial success. But alongside British genius, we must remember another great national quality: British compassion. So this final part of our plan protects the most vulnerable, and it's to that I now turn. Mr. Speaker, strong public finances aren't just to make accountants happy. It's because we took difficult decisions in 2010 that we could afford record funding increases for the NHS, the landmark furlough scheme, and now the energy price guarantee. Today, the discipline that we've shown means we can provide targeted support to help our most vulnerable citizens with the cost of living. One of the biggest worries for families is energy bills, and I pay tribute to my predecessor, the Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne, and the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, for their leadership in this area. This winter, we will stick with their plan to spend £55 billion to help households and businesses with their energy bills, one of the largest support plans in Europe. From April, we'll continue the energy price guarantee for a further 12 months at a higher level of £3,000 per year for the average household. With prices forecast to remain elevated throughout next year, this will mean an average of £500 support for every household in the country. At the same time, for the most vulnerable, we'll introduce additional cost of living payments next year of £900 to households on means-tested benefits, £300 to pensioner households, and £150 for individuals on disability benefit. We'll also provide an additional £1 billion of funding to enable a further 12-month extension to the Household Support Fund, helping local authorities to assist those who might otherwise fall through the cracks. And for those households who use alternative fuels, such as heating oil and LPG to heat their homes, I'm today doubling the amount of support from £100 to £200, which will be delivered as soon as possible this winter. And before the end of the year, we'll also bring forward a new targeted approach to support businesses from next April. But I want to go further to support people most exposed to high inflation. Around 4 million families live in the social rented sector, almost 1/5 of households in England. Their rents are set at 1% above the September inflation rate, which means that on current plans, they're set to see rent hikes next year of up to 11%. For many, that would just be unaffordable. So today I can announce that this government will cap the increase in social rents to a maximum of 7% in 23-24. Compared to current plans, that is a saving for the average tenant of £200 next year. This government introduced, I thought they cared about the most vulnerable. This government introduced the national living wage, which has been a giant step in eliminating low pay. So today I'm accepting the recommendation of the Low Pay Commission to increase it next year by 9.7%. That means from April 23, the hourly rate will be £10.42, which represents an annual pay rise worth over £1,600 to a full-time worker. It's expected to benefit over 2 million of the lowest paid workers in our country and keeps us on track for our target to reach 2/3 of median earnings by 2024. And it is the largest increase in the UK's national living wage ever. Mr. Speaker, there have also been some representations to keep the uplift to working age and disability benefits below the level of inflation, given the financial constraints we face. But that would not be consistent with our commitment to protect the most vulnerable. So today I also commit to uprate such benefits by inflation with an increase of 10.1%. That is an expensive commitment costing £11 billion, but it means 10 million working age families will see a much needed increase next year, which speaks to our priorities as a government and our priorities as a nation. On average, a family on universal credit will benefit next year by around £600, and to increase the number of households who can benefit from this decision, I'll also exceptionally increase the benefit cap with inflation next year. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I've talked a lot about British values of compassion, hard work, dignity, fairness. There is no more British value than our commitment to protect and honour those who built the country we live in. Yeah. So to support the poorest pensioners, I have decided to increase the pension credit by 10.1%, which is worth up to £1,470 for a couple and £960 for a single pensioner in our most vulnerable households. But the cost of living crisis is harming not just our poorest pensioners, but all pensioners. So because we've taken difficult decisions elsewhere today, I can also announce that we will fulfil our pledge to the country to protect the pensions triple lock. In April, the state pension will increase in line with inflation, an £870 increase, which represents the biggest ever increase in the state pension. And to the millions of pensioners who will benefit from this measure, I say now and always, this government is on your side. Mr. Speaker, there is a global energy crisis, a global inflation crisis, and a global economic crisis. But the British people are tough, inventive, and resourceful. We have risen to bigger challenges before. We aren't immune to these headwinds, but with this plan for stability, growth, and public services, we will face into the storm. There may be a recession made in Russia, but there is a recovery made in Britain. And we commit to our plan today with British resilience and British compassion. Because of the difficult decisions we take today, we strengthen our public finances, bring down inflation, protect jobs. We build the first state-backed nuclear power station for 30 years. We continue the biggest programme of capital investment for 40 years. We protect standards in schools, cut NHS waiting times, fund social care, cap energy bills, support those on benefits. We protect workers with the biggest ever increase in the national living wage, and our pensioners on the triple lock with the biggest ever increase in the state pension. This is a balanced plan for stability, a plan for growth, and a plan for public services. It shows that you don't need to choose either a strong economy or good public services. With Conservatives, and only with Conservatives, you get both. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Chancellor for that statement. So here we are, the end of 2022. 3 Prime Ministers, 4 Chancellors, and 4 budgets later. And where do we find ourselves? In a worse place than we started the year. Inflation spiralling, growth plunging, living standards falling. Mr. Speaker, Britain is a great country with fantastic strengths. But because of this government's mistakes, we are being held back. What people will be asking themselves at the next election is this: are me and my family better off with a Conservative government? And the answer is no. The mess we are in is the result of 12 weeks of Conservative chaos, but also 12 years of Conservative economic failure. Growth dismal, investment down, wages squeezed, public services crumbling. And what does the Chancellor have to offer today? More of the same, with working people paying the price for his failure. The Chancellor should have come here today to ask for forgiveness. At the very least, he could have offered an apology. But no, instead he says that his predecessor was correct in his analysis at the mini-budget. The mini-budget that put our economy into freefall. All the country got today was an invoice for the economic carnage that this government has created. Never again can the Conservatives be seen as the party of economic competence. Now, it's been clear for weeks what they wanted to do. Step one, blame global factors. Step two, pretend the mini-budget has nothing to do with any of them. Step three, portray the Chancellor and Prime Minister as the people who can clear up the mess of their party's own making. And step four, attempt to lay some so-called traps for the Labour Party. They've even had George Osborne in to advise them on how to party like it's 2010. But, Mr. Speaker, this isn't a game. This is about people's lives. This is about people's livelihoods. It's about their ability to pay the mortgage, their ability to pay the rent, and the ability to pay the bills after 12 years of Conservative stagnation that has left our country so much worse off. It's about the fact that when the global storm hits, we are uniquely exposed because of the choices that the Conservatives have made.
Exactly.
Now, Mr. Speaker, nobody doubts that the COVID pandemic and war in Ukraine have had profound implications. And the whole House is united in its condemnation of Russia's aggression. But Britain's problems started before the COVID pandemic, and they started before Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The UK has grown by an average of 1.4% a year under the Conservatives, compared to 2.1% a year in the Labour years before that. We are the only G7 economy that is still poorer than before the pandemic. As the Governor of the Bank of England told the Treasury Select Committee yesterday, the US has grown by 4.2% since the pandemic. The GDP of Eurozone countries is 2.1% higher. And yet the UK is 0.7% smaller than at the start of the pandemic. We aren't recovering. We are heading into recession, as the OBR has confirmed today. Now, the Governor described these differences as dramatic and as stark. How does the Chancellor describe them? And how does he explain them? This is the price of a decade of Tory choices and economic failure. And it is set to continue, with the IMF forecasting that out of the 38 most industrialised economies, the UK will have the slowest growth of any of them in the next 2 years. Now, the Chancellor is saying today that he will be honest. So let's be honest. No one was talking about cuts to public spending 2 months ago, and no other advanced economy is cutting spending or increasing taxes on working people as they head into recession. This government has forced our economy into a doom loop, where low growth leads to higher taxes, lower investment and squeezed wages, with a running down of public services, all of which hits economic growth again. And instead of learning from the mistakes of the last decade, they're simply repeating them. We need to break free from this vicious cycle of stagnation with fairer choices and a proper plan for economic growth. Now, the Chancellor and Prime Minister are trying to convince us that Britain faces problems that are nothing to do with them, that the mini-budget, which imposed a Tory mortgage premium, put pensions in peril and trashed our reputation around the world, was all just a bad dream. It's their Bobby Ewing strategy. Downing Street as Dallas. Old cast members return as if nothing had happened, with tangled plot lines to keep the audience. But the truth is, it has lost all credibility. And everyone knows it is long past time that this series was cancelled. And the problem for the British people is this. This is not a dream. This is the everyday nightmare of Tory Britain. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives would have us believe that they are not responsible for the last 12 years of failure. In doing so, they take the British people for fools. Millions are already worried sick about how to make ends meet and are now facing the added stress of higher mortgage payments, the prospect of home ownership becoming more and more remote, and rents going through the roof. What does this mean? Family holidays cancelled, savings depleted, hopes for the future replaced by sleepless nights. And all of this on top of the fact that the average worker is earning less today than when the Tories came to power 12 years ago. The government has presided over the biggest wage squeeze in centuries. This was a crisis made in Downing Street, and it is ordinary working people who are paying the price. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I was coming into Westminster today, I read a timely warning from the police about pickpockets in the area. They warn, you may have an idea of what a pickpocket looks like, but they're far less likely to stand out in a crowd than you think. They may work in teams to try and distract the target. And one of their tactics is where a thief will appear to be over-friendly while pickpocketing you. Now, I must report that in the last hour, the Conservatives have picked the pockets of purses and wallets of the entire country as the Chancellor has deployed a raft of stealth taxes, taking billions of pounds from ordinary working people. A Conservative double whammy that sees frozen tax thresholds and double-digit inflation erode the real value of people's wages. Just one of those freezes in the personal allowance will cost an average earner more than £600, make it even harder to make ends meet. At the same time, the government is forcing local councils to put up council tax. Now, the Chancellor seems to have confirmed today a council tax bombshell worth £100 for a typical Band D property, taking their council tax above £2,000 for the first time. Local people, including those with Conservative councils, will be forced to pay more because of the destruction that the Conservatives have wreaked on our economy. And this at a time when councils are already in dire straits because of cuts by Conservative governments. Now, they probably sat around the tables in Downing Street thinking that this was some clever trick. But no one is to blame except the government that's been in power for 12 years, not local authorities, but this Tory government. More taxes, more inflation, higher mortgages. And instead of tricks and stealth taxes, why don't they have a proper economic plan for Britain that puts working people at their heart? And why do they refuse to have a real industrial strategy that gives business certainty, unlocks investment, and means that Britain can once again lead the world in the industries of the future? Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor is trying to claim that this statement today is fair. Yet we learn that of all the things that he could save from the wreckage of the kamikaze budget that he chooses to press ahead with is their plan to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses. At a time when he's urging wage restraint for everybody else, how can he remotely claim that this is fair? And after weeks of will he, won't he, we learn today that the Chancellor won't, after all, be clapping down on non-doms. Tax-free income for millionaires while millions face frozen tax allowances and council tax highs. How can he possibly claim that this is fair? He refuses to act. And I wonder why. Maybe that was the only policy that he can't get signed off by number 10 Downing Street. I say, if you make your Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here. And what about the private equity managers earning millions who benefit from a tax break on their bonuses, which mean that they pay far less tax as a proportion of their incomes than ordinary hard-working people? Did the Chancellor close that loophole today and make sure that they pay their fair share of tax? He did not. He made ordinary working people pay the price instead. Because, Mr. Speaker, time and time again, we've seen how quick the Conservatives are to raise taxes on working people. Now, the Chancellor has even compared himself to Scrooge. He's asking working people to take the hit, with less money in their pockets in the run-up to Christmas, but also for years to come. But if you're a banker, a non-dom, or a private equity manager, don't worry. Scrooge hasn't cancelled your Christmas. And that's before we even get onto the energy giants. After months of resistance, well, the Honourable Lady says from a sedentary what about taxes? Well, the non-doms don't pay taxes. That is the whole point, and that is why the Chancellor should have closed that loophole today. And this is before we even get on to the energy giants. Really? They don't pay taxes. And that's before we even get on to the energy giants. After months of resistance from this Prime Minister, the government has finally been dragged kicking and screaming to extend the windfall tax that Labour have been calling for since January. Yet they still leave billions of pounds on the table. Profits that are the windfalls of war. Because they have failed to close a huge loophole that they created that hands out massive tax breaks to those oil and gas giants for doing the things that they were going to do anyway. For those wondering why, some energy giants have paid no windfall tax in the last quarter, despite record profits and eye-watering bills for consumers. The answer is the decisions that this Prime Minister made when he was Chancellor, confirmed by the current Chancellor, lets the energy giants off the hook once again. Mr. Speaker, the government has announced plans for energy bills next year, but bill payers will still see prices go up next spring, leaving far too many people wondering how they'll make ends meet. For every pound of windfall tax left on the table, people are faced with higher prices on their bills. And the Tories' failure on energy goes back much further. They closed down gas storage, blocked onshore wind and solar, and slashed support for home insulation. Now, today the Chancellor says that he will act on energy efficiency, but I'm afraid it's all far too late. We called for the insulation of 2 million homes a year more than 12 months ago that could cut bills by £1,000, not just for 1 year, but for every year to come. And they did nothing. Insulation levels in 2021 were 20 times lower than in 2010 because of their neglect. And now he proposes a package, but we have to wait until 2025 for them to act. Why? When people are facing a bills crisis now, years and years will have gone by while he sits back, millions of families could have been helped, and they have not been. And still they block renewable power, like onshore wind, that could bring energy bills down, create good jobs in all parts of the country, and ensure that Britain can lead the way in the industries of the future. Clean power is the right solution to the energy price crisis, but yet again the Conservatives have failed. They have failed to protect us from future shocks, failed to tackle the cost of living crisis, and failed to take the decisions in our country's national interest. It is because they have failed to grow the economy that they are having to bring forward yet another statement with tax rises and spending cuts. The last Prime Minister and Chancellor embarked on a reckless sugar rush that abandoned fiscal rectitude, and they all cheered for it. But the current Prime Minister and Chancellor have given up on growth altogether. And how do we know? Because the Office of Budget Responsibility has seen their plans, and they've downgraded growth in the months and years ahead. Achieving the levels of growth this country needs isn't like flicking on a switch. No. We need a serious long-term plan to get our economy growing again, powered by the talents and efforts of millions of ordinary working people and thousands of businesses. We need a fairer, greener, more dynamic economy, creating good jobs in every part of the country, in homegrown renewables, in green hydrogen, in carbon capture and storage, with Labour's Green Prosperity Plan, with a modern industrial strategy where government works hand in hand with business, properly fixing business rates so that small businesses and our high street businesses thrive again, and fixing the holes in the government's Brexit deal to help UK businesses trade and compete in the world, and ensuring that Britain is the best place to start and grow a business. That is what a Labour government will do. Mr. Speaker, while our public services are struggling and working people are being stretched, the rampant waste and cronyism from this government continues apace. It does not seem to concern the Chancellor that his government dished out £3.5 billion of contracts to friends and donors of the Conservative Party. And the latest Prime Minister spent so much time when he was Chancellor practising his signature for his glossy Instagram graphics that he failed to put in place even the most simple checks on COVID support. That is why the former Treasury Minister, Lord Agnew, described the current Prime Minister's fraud failures as schoolboy errors. The Prime Minister left the doors to the vaults wide open to organised criminals and drugs gangs. They helped themselves to £6.7 billion of taxpayers' money, money that the government is failing to retrieve. And last month it was slipped out that the Taxpayer Protection Task Force set up to get this money back is being wound down. The government's just given up, and the Conservatives are turning yet again to our crucial public services to make up the money. Mr. Speaker, the fraudsters may think that they have got away with it, but a Labour government will hunt them down for everything that they have taken from the taxpayer. The country is sick of being ripped off by the Tories. We want our money back. Because of Tory failure, our crumbling public services are set to suffer even more. Ordinary people lose yet again. Never before have people paid so much in tax and yet got so little in return. At the weekend, the Chancellor admitted that the NHS was already on the brink of collapse. With 7 million people on NHS waiting lists, how much longer will that list get? 3 in 10 people are leaving education without GCSE English and maths. What will this do to our society and our future economy? And why do the Tories have an ideological objection to putting VAT on school fees, which the Chancellor himself admits will raise £1.7 billion? By their actions, it is clear the government does not value our public services or the contribution of those working in them. And what do we hear today? Reviews on schools and the NHS workforce, on social care and on waste. But what we need is action. The time for delivery is now, not time for more reviews. And now we hear from the Chancellor, who had previously said that one of his biggest regrets as Health Secretary was failing to fix social care. And today he has further delayed the government's much-promised social care cap. This is yet another broken promise after 12 years of Tory failure on social care. The Tories have trashed our public services, and the statement today is proof that they are doing nothing to turn that around. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have crashed our economy, given up on growth, and sent inflation through the roof. And as usual, it is ordinary working people who are paying the price. It is a familiar tune. Every mortgage they raise, every cut they make, every tax they hike, the Conservatives are costing you. And what have we heard today? Yet more excuses and unfair choices. They have failed to tackle the cost of living crisis. They have failed to show how they will fix our public services. They have failed to show how they will deliver growth. And they have no plan for the future of our country. And everything we have heard today, and after 12 long years of Tory failure, the conclusion that we must come to is that Britain can no longer afford a Conservative government.
Let me start with the chair of the Select Committee, Harriet Bowen.
And that concludes the Shadow Chancellor, who of course also did some holiday cover on this programme last time I was away. Her response to the budget, essentially a fiscal statement, call it what you will, from Jeremy Hunt. We'll start picking over the bones of that after this. 12:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined now by Theo Ashwood, our political editor, shortly by Lionel Barber, the former editor of the Financial Times. I always like to check what Martin Lewis has to say on these occasions, and he points out that both benefits and the state pension are being increased by the 10.1% September inflation rate. And although it only happens until next April and will still be hard for many, he points out that any less than that would have been truly devastating. And a very interesting observation, which ties in with the conversation we were having right up to Jeremy Hunt getting to his feet, essentially saying to the Labour Party, let me start with a tough lesson for the party opposite. You cannot borrow your way to growth. There is one reason, and one reason only, that Jeremy Hunt is Chancellor of the Exchequer and delivering this budget today. And that is because 55 days ago, the Conservative Prime Minister and the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer bet everything on borrowing your way to growth. So if you thought that there was any exaggeration at all in the depiction of the surreal nature of this particular Conservative government, there it is in sentences. You cannot borrow your way to growth, says the man who is only Chancellor because the last Chancellor from his own party, and the Cabinet still has at least 8 of the same people in it, bet the House, bet the country, bet the British economy on a belief that you can borrow your way to growth. Absolutely crackers. Here's Theo.
Martin Lewis, of course, referring to pensioners on the triple lock and universal credit claimants. And, of course, they have been protected. But outside of the most vulnerable, and I'm quoting here from Paul Johnson, who is the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, he's saying that the numbers from the Office for Budget Responsibility are simply staggering. We're going to see real household disposable income per person fall by more than 7% over the next 2 years. That's the biggest fall on record, taking incomes down to 2013 levels. How has the Chancellor done this? Well, as Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, was pointing out, she talked about a double whammy of combining a freeze on thresholds at which you start paying both the basic rate of tax and, of course, the higher rate of tax, which kicks in at £50,000, freezing those thresholds, and then more people are dragged into those tax rates, and they're going to be frozen for an additional 2 years, all the way to 2028. And that's how Jeremy Hunt primarily wants to consolidate that £55 billion and fill that black hole that we were talking about earlier. There's going to be also, and this wasn't in the statement itself, but was in the Red Book that we got afterward, that my colleagues have got afterwards, council tax is going to go up. The local authorities are going to be able to increase council tax by 5%, up from 2.99%. And of course, that money can be used to pay for social care. Again, that's been delayed. He talked about defence spending, asking about where the cuts are going to come from. No commitment by the Chancellor to increase defence spending by 3% of GDP by 2030, just maintaining the current levels at 2%. But overall, he's protected the poorest, as he said he would do. But at the same time, we are going to be paying more tax. And of course, those headline rates of inflation, 9.4% this year, 7%, over 7% next year. And just on that energy price guarantee, going back to the Porsches and Lamborghinis conversation that we had, 6 weeks ago now, James?
Yeah. We're going to have to explain what that means now.
Are we?
Well, yeah.
Well, okay, it was Liz Truss saying, well, we're going to have all this tax.
Don't worry about don't worry about how we're going to pay for the Porsche. I've also bought a Lamborghini.
Well, it's more like a Skoda now, James, because from next April, that protection, the energy price guarantee, an average of £2,500, that's going to be £3,000 for the following 18 months. It's not going to be frozen at £2,500 for 2 years as originally promised.
Covered a lot of it there. Let's talk to Lionel Barber, former editor of the Financial Times. Lionel, what jumped out at you from either the budget or the OBR forecast or both or something else?
Well, it just shows you what a seat of the pants operation it was with Mr. Truss. mistrust and Kwasi, and the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, I think, has produced a pretty balanced package. There was obviously a lot of softening up going on, threatening taxes here, there, and everywhere. And as Theo says, it's a lot of the money is being recouped now by stealth. The other thing that struck me was actually the kind of elephant in the room is the rising worklessness in the public. That people have given up on working, or they're staying out of the workforce. There's huge shortages, and that's creating inflation. And that was the it's a big one, but he didn't tackle it today.
I'm also struck by this sort of wiping out, really, of 10 years of growth. If we've got 7% diminishment in the economy, then that takes us back to 2013 levels. That's quite remarkable, actually.
Well, growth has been a problem for some time, and I'm going to mention the B word, Brexit, but there are...
neither of them did they? I mean, how ridiculous is that getting now, the fact that neither the Chancellor nor the Shadow Chancellor mentioned it?
Well, everybody else is, James, and it's not just on your programme.
It used to be.
MPC, and I think it is going to be a factor, but we have to look forward at the same time. I think it was very important that Jeremy Hunt did produce extra money for the NHS. That's 3.3 billion extra next 2 years. More education for spending as well. So it wasn't quite the Scrooge which we've seen in the tabloids today.
And yes, and you suggested there was some expectation management going on over there. It just occurs to me, and you'll be more qualified than I am to comment on this suggestion. Was it? I mean, essentially quite a Blairite budget.
Well, Blair without any fancy shoes and pretty meagre suit. Yeah, I mean, look, Jeremy Hunt might have been seen 10 years ago or even 5 years ago as a hard-blued conservative, but in the way that politics has gone in this country, he's now seen as Blairite. I mean, i.e. somebody sort of common sense, middle ground chancellor. And I think actually, if you put him together with Rishi Sunak, that's actually what financial markets, and they are important, are looking for. They want some reassurance. They don't want some mad, bad, Trussonomic supply side stuff, which then pushes up the cost of borrowing, pushes up interest rates, and then you get in a real squeeze.
And that leads me to my final question. Is it too early to say how currencies or markets have responded to this? Because I know after Kwarteng's, the pound went up very briefly. Chris Philp was boasting about it in a tweet he later deleted.
Yeah, well, that was for about an hour or so, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and then afterwards, it was all downhill. I think there was a little bit of movement on sterling, but remember, James, it's now around 118. Now that's way below what it was. Brexit time, it was 150, and then it went down to 125. So there's been something of a recovery. But really what matters is less sterling. It's the interest rates and the cost of borrowing in the gilts market. That's what's to watch.
Keep an eye out. Lionel Barber, many thanks indeed. Former editor, of course, of the Financial Times, author of The Powerful and the Damned Private Diaries in Turbulent Times. Theo, taking us almost exactly up to the wire. A radio legend who shall remain nameless messaged me during that to say, do you think you might be able to squeeze in a mystery minute at the end?
Just one line I thought was interesting from Rachel Reeves when she pointed out, we now have the highest sustained tax burden since World War II. I use the word sustained because that's going to take us all the way through to 2027, combining the cuts to public services with, of course, the fact that we are paying much more in tax. She said, never before have people paid so much tax and got so little in return.
And in fact, much of that fiscal tightening is likely to kick in after the next general election, which Jim Pickard of the Financial Times has posted an interesting graph about that. And speaking about interesting graphs, if you're silly enough not to follow me on Twitter, then some of the things that have popped up during that speech include the chart showing the extent to which the fiscal tightening comes after the next election, albeit, which of course explains partly why there can be £9.5 billion worth of spending next year on health and education. The OBR forecasts living standards to fall 7% over the next 2 years, which will wipe out all growth from the previous 8 years, essentially a lost decade. going back to shortly after the Tories came into power. That pretty much does it for this week. Sheila's still away, so Sangeeta Maiskat will be with you next. Do remember that if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. I've noticed Nick starts playing a few highlights at this point, so to remember, of course, it's impossible for us to single out highlights of the programme. We'd have to replay the whole 3 hours. You can also, of course, download all LBC shows as well as the world's biggest podcasts. Download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sangeeta Maiskat next. 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 Sangeeta Maiskat next.